Trent Malrick was the quiet loner no one noticed. Sydney Sutherland was the vibrant soul everyone loved. One vanished. The other held the darkest secret Millstone Ridge had ever known. When Sydney went missing during her daily jog, the town was shaken. But no one imagined the smiling farmhand down the road had been stalking her for weeks. What unfolded next exposed a horrifying trail of obsession, hidden crimes, and a chilling twist that revealed Sydney wasn't his first victim, and might not have been his last. On a hot and quiet Thursday afternoon in August, the small rural town of Millstone Ridge moved at its usual slow pace. Located miles away from the nearest city, the community was tight-knit, where everyone knew each other's names and faces. Life here was simple, predictable, and safe, or so everyone thought. That belief was shattered the day Sydney Sutherland disappeared. Sydney, 25 years old, was a nurse who worked part-time at a family clinic in town. Her co-workers and neighbours described her as dedicated, friendly, and full of energy. She was the kind of person who lit up a room without saying a word. Her daily routine was no secret. She'd return home from work around 3 p.m, change into her running gear, and head out for her usual jog along County Road 18. A long stretch of gravel and farmland with barely any traffic. It was her favourite time of the day, a chance to disconnect and feel free. That afternoon, Sydney left her home. As usual, she wore a pink tank top, black shorts, and running shoes. She sent a quick text to a friend saying she was going out for a run, and then slipped her phone into her waistband. That was the last time anyone heard from her. 3 hours passed. Her friend, noticing that Sydney hadn't replied to a follow-up message, grew concerned. It wasn't like Sydney to go quiet, especially while out alone. As the sun began to dip below the trees, and no one had seen her return, the worry turned into panic. Her family called around, hoping she had stopped by someone's house, but no one had seen her since the afternoon. They drove down the gravel, road she often ran, hoping they'd find her midway through her route. What they found instead chilled them to the bone. Sydney's white sedan was still parked at the usual spot beside a large oak tree. Her keys were inside the car, and so was her water bottle, but she was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no torn clothing, just the empty car and a lingering silence that didn't feel right. That was when her family called the police. Within an hour, local officers arrived at the scene. They began a grid search with flashlights, combing the ditches and fields as the last light faded. Volunteers from town joined in, forming human chains as they moved through the tall grass, calling her name. It was an eerie night, filled with the rustling of cornstalks and the crunch of boots over dry soil. But despite their efforts, there was no trace of Sydney. By morning, the county sheriff had launched a formal investigation. Drones were deployed to scan the surrounding farmland from the air. Bloodhounds were brought in to pick up her scent. Her phone, still turned on, was pinging. Near the edge of the trail she often used, but it wasn't moving. Investigators thought she may have dropped it or worse. Something had happened before she could use it to call for help. The town was in shock. No one could understand how someone could vanish in broad daylight in an area so familiar. Rumours began to swirl. Some believed she may have had a seizure, or gotten lost in the woods, though that was unlikely. Others feared something darker: abduction. There were no known threats in her life, no bitter ex-boyfriends, no jealous co-workers. She had a good relationship with her family and no history of running away. This wasn't someone trying to escape life. This was someone who'd had it stolen from her. People locked their doors that night in Millstone Ridge for the first time in years. Women stopped walking alone. Strangers were eyed with suspicion. Something sinister had invaded their peaceful world, and no one knew where it was hiding. The only thing they knew for certain was that Sydney Sutherland was missing, and the clock was ticking. As the investigation into Sydney Sutherland's disappearance deepened, investigators began meticulously examining her daily habits, personal relationships, and any potential enemies she may have unknowingly made. Detectives from the Millstone Ridge Sheriff's Department, aided by state investigators, set up a command post near the trailhead where her car had been found. Every second that passed felt heavier than the last. Time was running out, and if Sydney was alive somewhere, the window to bring her home was closing fast. Authorities started by reviewing nearby surveillance cameras. Millstone Ridge didn't have a sophisticated security network, but a few local businesses and private farms had cameras facing the main road. One set of grainy images stood out, footage from a gas station 10 miles away, time-stamped at 3:46 p.m. on the day Sydney vanished. A dark blue pickup truck with oversized tires and a dent on the passenger side door passed by. The truck wasn't registered to anyone in town, and its route coincided with the time Sydney would have been jogging along the trail. Investigators ran the plates, and the vehicle was linked to a man named Trent Malrick, a 36-year-old farmhand, who had been living on his cousin's property just outside the county limits. He was rarely seen in town, kept to himself, and worked odd jobs for cash. To most people, he was just another drifter who preferred life in the shadows. But what the police found in his background raised several red flags. Trent had a sealed juvenile record and 2 previous arrests in other states for harassment and trespassing. He had once been accused of stalking a woman in Nebraska, though charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. He had moved around frequently, never staying in one place for long. Detectives knew they had to speak with him, but without physical evidence tying him to Sydney's disappearance, they had to proceed carefully. 2 deputies visited the property where Trent was living. He emerged from a weathered mobile home wearing stained jeans and a loose t-shirt. His behavior was calm, almost indifferent. He told the officers he'd been working on a nearby hayfield all day and hadn't left the property. When asked if he knew Sydney, he claimed he didn't. He said he'd seen her jogging before but never talked to her. The interaction lasted 15 minutes, and though nothing he said directly contradicted itself, the deputies left uneasy. Cell tower data, however, would soon begin to unravel his story. Investigators subpoenaed his phone records and discovered his device had pinged within 1 mile of the trail at the exact time Sydney was believed to have disappeared. This directly contradicted his claim that he had been on the farm all day. More alarming was the fact that after 4 p.m., his phone was turned off for nearly 4 hours before reconnecting to a tower 15 miles away. The timing was too precise to ignore. At the same time, Sydney's phone had stopped sending any signal around 4:10 p.m. It had remained in one general area for a while before going dark altogether. Investigators began to believe the phones had been near each other during those crucial moments. A digital trail was forming, and it was leading straight to Trent Malrick. But with no physical evidence, no eyewitnesses, and no body, law enforcement couldn't make an arrest. Frustration boiled behind closed doors. They were certain Trent was involved, but suspicion wasn't enough to hold him. They began conducting surveillance on him, hoping he'd slip up or lead them to something, anything they could use. Detectives interviewed dozens of residents who lived near the trail. Some recalled seeing a truck that matched Trent's in the area over the past few weeks, sometimes parked near the fields, sometimes driving slowly past runners. One woman even reported seeing it pulled over with the driver watching the road, though she hadn't thought much of it at the time. As these stories were pieced together, a chilling picture began to form. Someone had been stalking Sydney. Someone who had memorized her routine. Someone who knew the exact moment she would be most vulnerable. All signs pointed to a man who had done this before, or was at least capable of doing it again. Investigators felt the pressure mounting. The clock wasn't just ticking anymore, it was thundering in their ears. 3 days after Sydney Sutherland's disappearance, the mood in Millstone Ridge had shifted from hopeful urgency to quiet despair. Flyers with Sydney's photo were plastered across the town. Makeshift signs saying, "Bring Sydney home," had been placed on mailboxes and fences. The community had united, but there was an unspoken fear lingering in the air, that they were no longer searching for someone lost, but for someone taken. That Sunday morning, a retired firefighter named Yvonne Becker took his dog Jasper out for a walk on his property, which spanned across 30 acres of farmland and brush. It was a path he had walked hundreds of times, a narrow trail that bordered a long, unused irrigation ditch. About halfway through the walk, Jasper started barking uncontrollably and pulling hard on the leash toward a patch of overgrown weeds. As Ivan moved closer, he spotted something out of place. A small pink object, almost buried in dirt. When he knelt down to clear away the debris, his stomach turned cold. It was a running shoe, bright pink, worn but intact, and unmistakably the same style Sydney Sutherland had worn in the photos circulated by police. Ivan immediately called 911, his hands shaking. Officers were dispatched to the scene within minutes. The area was quickly taped off, and crime scene units arrived with shovels, scanners, and cadaver dogs. Drones flew overhead. What had started as a missing person case was now, without question, a crime scene. By late afternoon, the team uncovered shallowly buried human remains beneath the thicket. The site was concealed by natural brush and located just half a mile from where Sydney's phone had last pinged. The body, although partially decomposed, was quickly confirmed to be Sydney's through identifying features and clothing. What disturbed investigators the most was the condition of her body. There were signs of a violent struggle. She had suffered a significant blow to the back of her head, which the medical examiner would later confirm as the fatal injury. There were bruises on her wrists and ankles, indicating she had been restrained. And most heartbreaking of all, signs of sexual assault were present. The discovery sent shockwaves through Millstone Ridge. Strangers wept openly in the streets. Candlelight vigils were held. The search was over, but closure still felt out of reach. Questions swirled. Who would do this? Why her? And how had they gotten away with it for even this long? With a body now recovered, detectives returned with renewed focus to their primary suspect, Trent Malrick. His suspicious behaviour, his false alibi, and now the proximity of the burial site to areas he was known to frequent, all pointed directly at him. A new search warrant was drafted, and officers descended on his property the following morning. They searched every corner of the mobile home, the tool shed, and the surrounding acreage. In the back of his shed, hidden beneath a pile of rusted scrap metal, they found something chilling. A partially burned plastic bag containing women's clothing. One item was unmistakably Sydney's pink tank top. It had been slashed in several places. Forensic testing was rushed. Fibres from the clothing matched those found under Sydney's fingernails. Soil samples from the clothing matched the burial site. Now they had enough to arrest him. Trent Malrick was taken into custody that same evening without incident. He didn't ask why he was being arrested. He didn't say a word, but his silence said everything. Even as investigators worked through the evidence, the feeling that something was missing continued to gnaw at them. There was a calculated coldness to how the crime had been carried out, a sense that this was not spontaneous or deliberate. This wasn't a one-time offence committed in a moment of rage. It felt like something Trent had done before. And soon they'd discover that they were right. With Trent Malrick now in custody, the investigation took on a new urgency. Detectives were no longer searching for answers. They were assembling a case airtight enough to ensure Trent would never walk free again. As for the people of Millstone Ridge, the arrest brought a temporary sense of relief, but underneath that was a boiling curiosity. Everyone wanted to know who exactly was Trent Malrick, and what had led him to murder Sydney Sutherland in such a brutal, calculated way. In the days following his arrest, investigators began peeling back the layers of Trent's past. What they found was darker than expected. Although his juvenile record was sealed, private interviews with individuals from his hometown of Walden, Nebraska, revealed disturbing patterns. A woman named Corinne Dalloway came forward after seeing news coverage. Nearly a decade ago, she had filed a complaint against Trent after he followed her home from work several times. She had once found a dead bird on her porch, with a note that read, "I see you." Police dismissed it as a prank, but Corinne had always suspected Trent. She was never able to prove it, and eventually he left town. Another woman, Elise Roeder, shared a nearly identical story. While working at a convenience store where Trent was a frequent customer, she often caught him staring at her without speaking. One night after closing, her car tires were slashed. She never pressed charges, but the memory remained vivid and terrifying. These testimonies didn't serve as direct evidence, but they painted a picture of a man with a history of obsession, stalking, and unaddressed violence. Back in Millstone Ridge, detectives turned their attention to Trent's digital footprint. What they discovered only deepened their suspicions. On his laptop and external hard drives, forensics recovered thousands of files, videos, images, and documents. Among them were saved local news articles about missing women from neighbouring states. Some were still unresolved. Others bore grim similarities to Sydney's case. Women who had gone missing while walking alone, whose bodies were found days later in rural areas. One folder, labelled only with a single initial, contained dozens of photos of Sydney. Some appeared to be taken from afar, possibly with a telephoto lens. Sydney jogging, walking to her car, shopping at a local store. All of them had been taken without her knowledge. Investigators realized with growing horror that Trent had been watching her for weeks, maybe even months, carefully studying her movements. His attack wasn't random. It was the final act of a long, premeditated plan. A second search of Trent's shed uncovered an old notebook, stained with oil and covered in dust. Inside were disturbing entries written in jagged handwriting. Some pages described women he had followed. Others listed names, locations, and dates. One page contained Sydney's name, followed by chilling phrases. Same time daily, alone, no dogs, and low risk. The entry ended with a date, August 19th, the day Sydney disappeared. Investigators believed they were dealing with more than just a killer. They suspected Trent Malrick was a serial predator, possibly responsible for other disappearances across the region. The FBI was notified, and a task force was formed to link his movements over the past decade to unsolved cases in multiple states. But for now, the priority remained securing justice for Sydney. Prosecutors began building their case methodically. DNA evidence, digital records, witness statements, and the journal entries formed a solid foundation. Trent was charged with capital murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault. He was denied bail, and preparations began for a high-profile trial that would grip the region. Sydney's family kept a low profile, away from media attention, quietly preparing for the long road ahead. Their grief was deep and unshakable, but they were determined to see this through. Sydney had loved life. She had trusted the world, and someone had shattered that trust. Now it was time to make sure he could never do it again. But just when investigators thought they had uncovered all of Trent's secrets, a final discovery would change the direction of the case and reveal that the nightmare was far from over. As preparations for Trent Malrick's trial intensified, detectives received an unexpected phone call from a cold case detective in Carter County, Missouri. She had been reviewing news about Sydney Sutherland's murder and noticed alarming similarities between Trent's behavior and an unsolved case from 2016. A 24-year-old woman named Marlene Wexler had gone missing while jogging along a rural trail. Her body was discovered 6 days later in a shallow grave with signs of sexual assault and blunt force trauma. No one had ever been arrested. The case had gone cold. Until now, the Carter County detectives shared their case files with the Millstone Ridge Task Force. The resemblance was uncanny. Same victim profile, same burial method, same isolated location near a wooded trail. Even more chilling, credit card records revealed that Trent had worked in Carter County for a short time during the summer of 2016, picking up farm jobs under an alias. It was the break the FBI needed to dig deeper. Trent's movements were now being mapped backward across several states. Investigators discovered that he had lived in 5 different rural towns over the last decade, always for short periods. Each town had at least one open missing person case involving young women who had vanished while walking or jogging alone. The pattern was unmistakable. Trent hadn't just killed Sydney. He had likely been hunting for years. Back in Millstone Ridge, new forensic evidence emerged from the final analysis of Trent's burned clothing bag. a single hair was found that didn't match Sydney's. It was sent to the FBI for comparison, and the results were stunning. It belonged to Marlene Wexler. This connection not only tied Trent to her murder, but confirmed what investigators feared. He was a serial killer hiding in plain sight, moving from town to town, preying on isolated women, and disappearing before anyone could notice the pattern. This revelation shifted the entire focus of the trial. Prosecutors expanded the case against him, now collaborating with federal agents. Trent Malrick would no longer be tried only for Sydney's murder, but potentially for others as well. The courtroom was prepared for a storm of national attention, and Sydney's family braced themselves for what was to come. But before the trial could begin, there was one last twist. While reviewing surveillance footage from a gas station near the trail where Sydney had vanished, an analyst noticed a shadow in the passenger seat of Trent's truck. It was believed he acted alone, but this raised doubts. Enhancing the footage revealed a blurry but undeniable shape, a second person. Investigators froze the frame and studied it carefully. The outline was slim, small, possibly a woman. Trent had never mentioned anyone else. He claimed complete responsibility after his arrest. But now police wondered, was someone else helping him? Or worse, was someone else involved in other cases too? A second suspect meant the nightmare wasn't over. Investigators interrogated Trent again, this time armed with the new footage. He remained silent, refusing to speak or confirm anything. But when shown the image, his eyes flickered just once, and that was enough to reignite the investigation. Detectives combed through Trent's phone again, focusing on text records and deleted messages. They found a string of cryptic texts to someone listed only as S. The messages hinted at coordination, warnings, and shared knowledge of routes and watch points. While the identity of S remained unknown, it was clear. Trent hadn't acted entirely alone. Someone out there knew what he'd done. Someone may have helped him watch, track, or even lure victims. Though Trent Malrick would eventually be found guilty and sentenced to life without parole, the case of Sydney Sutherland remained open in another sense. Her killer was behind bars, but justice was only half complete. The search for S began, quietly and relentlessly, fueled by the fear that someone else with the same darkness still walked free. Sydney's story didn't end with a trial. It became a warning. A name spoken in true crime forums, classrooms, and documentaries as the case that revealed how evil can hide in ordinary faces, and how one person's tragedy can uncover a far deeper horror.